Okay, this is section 6.6 in your textbooks. These are the questions that you were required to answer to show that you understand how to apply order of operations in either context or in just simplifying an expression. So the first question, A, says 3/4, take away a half, multiplied by 2/3. The first thing you need to do is realize that there are two operations of subtraction and multiplication. I will not do my subtraction first, but rather I will do what 1/2 times 2/3 is, which is 2/6. Now obviously it would be easier if you used that in lowest terms, which of course is 1/3. So you can either do 3/4 take away 2/6, or if you wanted to, just do 3/4 take away 1/3. It makes your numbers a little bit easier, but you don't have to do it. I'm not going to do it, just to show you that we are going to get the same answer if you did do it. Common denominator will be 12. Equivalent fraction to 3/4 is 9/12. Equivalent fraction to 2/6 is 4/6. And once you have that, you're going to subtract your numerators and keep your denominators to give you a final answer of 5/12. Your second question, B, says 2 1/5 divided by, and then in brackets it gives you a subtraction. So it's saying if you have subtraction, but they're in brackets, you should do those first. So I'm going to change 2 1/5 to this. I'm going to just leave it like here, divided by. And I'm actually going to float it down a little bit because I'm going to give myself room to actually do the subtraction. This will be 16/20, take away 5/20, which will be 11/20. So when I simplify the brackets, I end up getting an answer of 11/20. Now, of course, this is division, and I've changed my mixed fraction already to improper, which is what you should have done, because you can't divide it if it's mixed. Keep your first fraction, multiply by the reciprocal of your second fraction. And here I'm going to say, listen, I know some of you can't cross reduce, but watch what happens if you do. It's such a beautiful thing right now. If you cross reduce and you pretend that 11 was over that 11, it becomes 1/1. This 20/5 would become 4/1. And when you multiply it out, you're going to end up with a final answer of just 4, right? Now, if you don't cross reduce, that's up to you. That's up to you if you don't want to learn it. But if you don't learn it, you end up with 220 over 55. You can divide both by 5. You end up with 44 over 11, which will reduce down to 4/1, which is simply equal to 4. Either way, you're going to get the same answer of 4. And your final question, C, is a mixed fraction 3.5 plus 2.5 times 1 1/4 take away 3/4. So I'm not going to do this, but I am going to make this conversion because I know I'm going to eventually use to convert the mixed fractions to improper. I'm going to float this down a little bit to give me some space to work out what 1 1/4 take away 3/4 is. And most of us can probably do that in their head. Most of us know that half, or taking away a quarter, would be 1. And taking away another half would be a half. So some of us can probably do that in their head and get half as an answer. But for those of us who can't, change your mixed fraction to improper, subtract your numerators, keep your denominator, you get 2/4, which in lowest terms is a half. So when I work all that out, those brackets become a half, and now I have this. Now inexplicably, I think people forget to do BeDMAS still, but the 7/2 plus still stays there. I'm going to multiply 5/1 times 2/2 to get 5/4. Got to follow my BeDMAS. Now you find your common denominator of 4. 14/4 plus 5/4 is 19/4, which is 4. Did I make a mistake? Where did I make a mistake? Is it 20? 14 plus 5 is 20? Did anyone else have 4 3/4? 4 3/4 is the answer. Yeah, so for those of you who got 20/4, 14 plus 5 is 19. Question 5A says 5/6 plus 2/3 multiplied by 3/7. So I'm going to first rewrite this down here just to plus 2/3 in brackets multiplied by 3/7. So solve my brackets by finding a common denominator, an equivalent fraction. Add your numerators to get 9. Keep your denominator to get 6. I'm not even going to change it. I'm going to leave it as 9 over 6 multiplied by, so this bracket simplifies to be 9 over 6 multiplied by 3 over 7. I'm not going to cross reduce even though I should. 9 times 3 over 6 times 7 will give you 27 over 42. And if you thought that was lowest terms, you're wrong. Because remember, a number is divisible by the number 3 if you take the number and add the digits. And if the sum of the digits of the number is a multiple of 3, then that number is divisible by 3. So that means since 9 and 6 are both divisible by 3, so we're 27 and 42. Divide by 3, divide by 3. This will be 14. This will be 9. So in lowest terms, you have 9 over 14. But if you cross-reduce, look what happened. You would have got 9 over 14 anyway, right? Smart move. Question B, 1/2 plus 3/5 divided by 3/4 divided by 2/5. I'm going to do my division first, so I'm going to keep 3/5. I'm going to bring this down here. I'm going to keep my 3/5 and multiply by the reciprocal. I can't possibly not cross-reduce this because it would be blasphemous. That's going to be 1 over 1, which means this is going to become 4/5. So 3/5 divided by 3/4 is 4/5. Now I'm going to keep your first one, keep the 4/5, and multiply by the reciprocal of 2/5, which is 5 over 2. And again, I can't in good conscience not cross-reduce that or this, because when I cross-reduce that multiplication, it becomes 1/2 plus 2. And if you are trying to figure out what procedures do I have to do to add a half to a whole number, don't. It's simply 2.5 as a final answer. Right? Just use your brains. What is a half plus 2? It's 2.5. And finally, your last question, C. Fairly complicated. 1 2/5 times 2.25 divided by 1 1/8, take away 2/3. So again, before you do any math, just write down the things you're not going to do yet. Now I'm changing the mixed fractions in that step to improper, which is a good form. Bring it down a little bit because you have to figure out what the brackets actually work out to be. 9 over 8, take away 2 over 3. Common denominator will be 24. Equivalent fraction to 9/8 that has a denominator of 24 is 27/24. Equivalent fraction to this will be 16/24, which is 11/24. So that whole bracket works out to be 11/24. So I write that down with the rest of it. That was a little bit of work, but it's not that hard. It's just keeping your work organized, right? 11/24. Oh, what did I do there? I went back a page, didn't I? Oopsie daisy. Where am I at here? So now that I have this, I have only multiplication division, so I'm going to do them in the order they appear. First one I'm going to do is 7 over 5 times 5 over 2. If you don't cross reduce, you're going to get 35 over 10, but if you do cross reduce, you're going to get 7 over 2. I'm not going to cross reduce because some people aren't doing it, and I need to show you what your answer would be if you didn't cross reduce. So you're going to get 35 over 10 multiplied by the reciprocal, which would be 24 over 11. And here's where it gets complicated if you didn't cross reduce. Now your numbers are ungodly big, and you're like, why didn't I cross reduce? 35 multiplied by 24 is 840 over 110, which will become 84 over 11 when you divide both by 10, which will then be 7, which is 77, and 7/11 as your final answer. So question 6 is just like your second show you know. It says Leo earns $16 an hour in a city park. For time worked above 35 hours a week, he earns what's called time and a half or overtime wages. How much does he earn for each of the following number of hours worked in a week? So the first thing I need to do, if he works a 36-hour week, he made his $16 an hour times the first 35 hours that he made. Because he worked after 35 hours, he just gets paid $16 an hour. But for every hour after that, he's going to make an extra, instead of 16 bucks, he's going to make time and a half. So to that, we're going to add that $16 multiplied by what's going to be called his time and a half. That's how much money he makes per hour of overtime. And we're going to multiply that by the number of hours he worked overtime. Now, you might say he worked 1 hour of overtime, because if he worked 36 hours and 35 is regular wages, that means he made 1 hour of overtime. But what we're going to do is take how many hours he worked and take away his original 35 to figure out that's going to be 1 hour. So over here, we're going to now simplify it. 16 multiplied by 35 means he made $560 in regular wages. 16 times 1.5 will be 16 multiplied by 3 over 2, which will end up being 48 over 2, which will end up being 24. This means he made $24 an hour multiplied by the number of overtime hours, which unfortunately was just 1 overtime hour. But for that hour, he made 24 bucks an hour. So altogether, he made $584 in regular wages and in overtime wages. Now in the second question, everything is going to stay the same, except this time he's not working 36 hours, and B, he's working 39 hours. So I'm going to put 39 here. So he still makes the $560 in regular. He's still getting paid $24 an hour in overtime, but this time he's going to work 4 hours of overtime, which means it's going to be $560 plus $96 in overtime, which means if he worked 39, he's going to make $656 in wages this time if he works 39 hours, which is 4 hours of overtime. In C, if he works 42 hours, I'm going to change the 39 to 42. That means he worked 7 hours of overtime. $560 plus 140 and 28 is 168. That's his overtime. For the 7 hours of overtime, he gets paid 168 bucks plus the 560 for regular. That will be $728 is his take-home pay. And finally, for 37 and a half hours of work will be only 2.5 hours of overtime. But now we have 24 multiplied by 2.5 will end up being 120 over 5, which will end up being 60. He's going to get paid $60 for his overtime, plus his $560 for his regular. His take-home pay will be 620 bucks.